Hi, Courtney. So
Hi,
exciting.
Tatiana.
It's so exciting to have you here.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here.
And hello to everyone who's tuning in, either live or might be listening later. I'm really excited for today's conversation, and my guest is Courtney Roberts, who is Courtney and I, we have known each other probably now for 26 years, if not longer, 27. So that's a long time. And Courtney is really passionate social impact leader. And she has an amazing mission to create positive impact in the world for the sake of the livable planet. And I know that equality, international development are super important driving forces for Courtney. And actually, since first time I met Courtney, she had that purposeful approach to life. Already then, she cared about international development as a young woman. And that was the most important thing. We met at Columbia Business School, Courtney, I think on the first induction day. And I think during already a first meeting, I could feel how passionate you are about bringing this development throughout the world and how curious you are actually about different cultures. So thank you, Courtney, for joining me on this conversation about intensity.
And thanks, Tatiana. I can't wait. And the special thing about you and our relationship is I felt exactly the same way. It's almost like I spied you across the hall. And I thought maybe you were from a place where I'd done so much work at that time, Central Europe, Russia. I heard you. I felt your power. And when we spoke, though, it became deep and the connection was immediate. So I'm really looking forward to talking to your audience and sharing what I know and insights that I've developed, and also possibly some about you as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Courtney. And actually, when not that long ago, you visited me in the UK, and my daughters both highlighted how we are both so intense and in quite a different way. And on that, I wanted to ask you, what is actually intensity for you? And I remember actually we had a conversation as well. When I shared that with you, you said, "Oh no, Tatiana, you are more intense than me." And and even with that, I'm curious, what is intensity for you, and what makes you say that about me, for example?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but let me try to be articulate. So for me, I think intensity has a personal and professional dimension, and I try really hard to show up from a position of trust and to be vulnerable and authentic right away. There's issues I care about deeply, and I'm very, very lucky now at this point in my career that I would say maybe 90, 85% of the conversations I have, or they're with people who have similar intentions. They're driven by purpose. They're driven, and the whole point of them is to help catalyze positive change in the world and to work together to figure out how we can complement each other. Um, and power, personal power, is an aspect of that too. And the reason I say you're much more intense than me is I feel your power in a way that I don't feel from others. And that's been since I met you. You're extremely goal oriented. You're extremely purpose driven. And I think this notion of success, that's also there. And perhaps the differentiator, I view you as driven to success by leveraging your purpose and your power. And I've always admired that. And I've been able to learn from that, both in our personal relationship and more recently, as you shared your nuggets, your golden nuggets from your work through Adaptaa.
Hmm. Thank you, Courtney. And of course, it's it warms my heart to hear that you see this connection with purpose, and you mentioned a couple of very important words as you describe intensity as well, and what is important for you in the perception of intensity. Because for me, intensity is a presence of certain energy, right? And it could come across as this perception of power. And also, intense people tend to take space in some ways. And because that energy is so powerful, it of course can have more amplified positive and also negative impact, right? So I have been reflecting on what differentiates what I call toxic intensity from healthy intensity. And I believe they both can coexist. So it's not like that the person is always in healthy intensity or always in toxic intensity. There is a choice. And how you described that it's about trust and purpose, that's for me are very important components of moving to healthy intensity. So when we are clear and conscious about our purpose, and we show up with energy of nothing to prove, i.e. we trust ourselves, and through that we can open ourselves to trust others, then there is an opportunity to move to healthy intensity. So I'm wondering for you, obviously, the purpose, like which part of it would you feel right now you'd like to explore deeper? Are you more drawn to speaking about purpose, or are you more drawn to talking about how this trust to self and trust to others show up to stay
Well,
healthy?
what really resonates with me is what you just said about showing up with nothing to prove. I think that's an area that probably most people on this call can learn the most from, and certainly me. The trust and the vulnerability and the willingness to take risk, to connect with people, other people who are sort of like-minded, that's important. And I think most people have mastered that throughout their career, in whatever they choose to work at. But this showing up with nothing to prove, it's something I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thought of in my space as a thought leader, working on monetizing impact. My belief is that the private sector, beyond international development, wants to behave in a way where they will also be impactful and profit focused at the same time. But there's not the incentives, and people aren't willing to sort of buck the system and stand up for what they believe in. And I'm called on often to explain these ideas. And sometimes I see myself being a bit single-minded and rigid in the way I explain them. Because moving from pure profit to purpose and profit requires the ability to adapt. So I'm breaking that essential rule that I'm showing up in a more rigid way, really bordering on defensiveness, because I have something to prove to them in the conversation. And I have to be really conscious of that. I think that's definitely an area where toxicity rears its terrible little head. So that's something that really resonates with me. And that's the most challenging aspect of intensity for me.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because it's also so important to be like this mission of yours is so important for the world. So wouldn't it be wonderful if organizations, if companies focus not only on profit, but also on purpose and the impact? And that's why it's so important to communicate it in a way not from narrow-minded position. And you're almost like so attached to that. Like, what do you think in that moment would support you to take more, like almost to get out of this tunnel vision of I have to prove it?
One thing may be to set aside my own predilection for evidence. And it may be, of course, companies are always looking at data. It's very important. It drives your decisions. But there's a big distinction between data and evidence. When you talk about evidence, you're already making this assumption that the framing of the data is in a way that you want to frame it and get to the conclusion that you want to get to. I think it needs a gentler approach where you meet them at, well, what are the data that's important to you? What drives your business? And then figure out how to come in from their framing to introduce the big idea of how their framing can be aligned with these overall goals that are just really a small shift away from what they're doing now. And again, I think this I don't have a problem with, and it's the assumption that people are good actors. I'd always assume that people are good actors because one is much better off dealing with the few bad actors that come up and just making the assumption that everyone is a good actor and meeting them there. But it's this sitting in the space of the other person's framing and focusing on relational intensity rather than simply this, assuming your framing will be accepted right away. So I think that's a little bit of a wonky description there, but being more of a data focus than an evidence focus.
Fascinating. So it sounds like what I'm hearing you saying, it's to come more from the place of curiosity, actually, to open the conversation with a question of what actually data do you need, rather than going straight away into proving your position.
Exactly. It's starting pre-hypothesis, essentially, and asking them how being curious about their wants, needs, and desires, and where they're starting and how they can align with the purpose-driven focus on growth and profit. Because I do think that ultimately people are aligned. Companies do want to be good actors, and and if you come at this defensive position, if you're pushing this idea at the end already before you listen to them, you miss out on a lot of the nuances of how to communicate well.
Yes. And you said another very important thing. So like you use the expression that you actually do assume they are good actors. What I understood is like that kind of have positive intention, right? And yet when we come in and start proving something, and in your case, presenting the case at like how important it is, the impact, not just profit, it's almost like coming from ignoring this positive regard and potentially positive intention of them. So rather than coming like using that there is an availability of the meeting, there is a space that is created, and if they are in a space with you, not only you cognitively acknowledge this positive intention, but you actually really almost like live into this positive intention.
Absolutely. And I think what you said about curiosity is key. And from a practical perspective, even beyond development, beyond social impact, it doesn't matter what field you're in. If you approach your interactions where you have this goal of seeking alignment with others, if you approach it from a position of discovery and curiosity rather than with this need to prove yourself, it can transform the experience and lead to longer term connection. They'll invite you back for the next meeting or the next phone call. And otherwise, you may be stuck with talking to people who already agree with you.
That's right. And then there is actually much less um, much less spreading of the positive impact, right? So that is fascinating. It's like that is completely usable anywhere in any area with any purpose we're pursuing, because so often I see even senior leaders in my work over preparing for the meetings. And while preparation is important, when we come to the meeting, well, and kind of dumping almost everything what we know from the way how we process data and evidence, that stops this connection and stops the curiosity and creates this energetic presence of somebody trying to prove something.
You're right. You're right. I see that there's a question in the chat.
Oh, really? So can you read the question? I don't see it.
Let me know when. Oh, it's appropriate now. Excellent. Yeah. So Andrew says, what data helps you make decisions that are aligned with your values? So I can explain my perspective. I think the most important thing, though, because essentially I run an advisor services company, so we have a way of doing this internally, but we have an extreme client focus. So it's just a little bit different when we work with clients, and it connects up to what we've been talking about here. So from the perspective of my firm, it's a little bit wonky. We have an overall mission, or what we call as theory of change, and there's certain types of impact that we want to make. So we keep that in mind all the time. It's our North Star. And so the outputs that we have, our work and our clients and our revenues, that's super important. But I don't care about revenue on its own. I want to know what difference does that revenue make? What difference does it make to my firm and my team? What difference does it make to the space where we're working? Is that outcome of a successful project that's bringing the company more revenue, really leading to the change that we'd like to see in the world? So the data goes beyond, I guess, what we call the outputs, which are the direct result of the action. Direct result of the sales of the services is the revenue. But I want to know, what's the quality of that revenue? Does it align with the values of the firm? And what change is it actually making, other than paying the company's salaries? And what is it actually pushing the ideas forward? Is it actually helping a client move closer to life on a livable planet through their purpose-driven profit, purpose-driven success if they're a nonprofit? But when it's the client, I think the data, again, it depends what their overall goals are. And if it's a project level activity, it might be different types of data, very specific to the activities that are being implemented. I try to push people up into a higher level, into kind of the meta level, where they look at lots of different projects and they see what is the whole. So this is a big area of our focus of our work, is to get companies, to get large international development organizations to stop thinking about things in little silos of individual activities that respond to specific budgets, but to actually take a level up and say, what do we have here? Have we been effective across our group of projects at sticking to our aligned goal? Highly detailed. Hope that answers the question that Andrew had.
So it is fascinating, Courtney, because you mentioned a very important thing of going to high level. And what I also see in leaders, and I observe it in myself, and I think it's how you describe it. The shift to this proving energy also often coincides of getting into this tunnel vision. And in tunnel vision, we get lost in the details.
Definitely. I mean, even in a regular private sector firm, you might be worried about meeting your numbers. You might be worried about customer levels and all of that. But how are you also considering the overall reputation of your brand? I mean, you might not be working in marketing. Maybe you don't care about that, but you're not going to be able to consistently make your numbers if you don't have some interaction with people who are worrying about the reputation of your brand, and you kind of understand what your customers really need. And that's a simple example. But if you're an international development organization trying to make social impact, you might be great at one aspect, but then what's happening in the bigger picture? What's happening to the environments that you're working in, what's happening to across the different project portfolio. And a lot of people get bogged down with too much data. I like to be simple about it. I like to say there's really only two, I guess, indicators of success, and that is one, did you do what you say you were going to do? It's a very simple thing, but it's like it's like the apex indicator for social impact. We get bogged down with all these details. How about at what level were you effective at doing what you set out to do? And if not, why not? And then does what you set out to do actually materially change, that part of the world that you're working to influence?
Yeah, and that's actually a very important point. Did you say, did you do what you said you're going to do? And also, actually, did others understand what you committed to?
Absolutely.
And this is like, have you made right agreements? So when you are in this meeting, rather than going into a lot of data details, staying at a high level and seeing what is actually important for another counterparty, because in this way you can align on this bigger purpose together, and also become clear on what each of you is committing to, what actually you're agreeing to, because sometimes we feel we did do what we said what we will do. However, a client or another stakeholder might have heard us differently. And because we were so lost into too much detail and into our desire to prove something, that we haven't noticed that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think, again, I'd like to bring in this notion of success and agreeing, what does success look like? And this is something that I saw you've always been able to do in your career, as I've tracked your career. And this is very important in personal relationships too. You sort of have this, in this different, it manifests differently. You don't have explicit milestones in personal relationships necessarily, but being aware that people are working towards the same milestones. And for me, the framing of those milestones is the important thing. I can meet people to help them achieve the milestones that they want, but understanding their framing, promoting this impact-focused, purpose-driven framing, this is a very delicate balance. And agreeing together, what does success look like? How can we talk about profit with purpose in a way that it can meet their idea, their vision of what success looks like?
And coming back to this, how does intensity relate to that? That's also taking responsibility, that if you are someone who might be viewing themselves as intense or might be perceived by others as intense, what it means is that you probably carry quite strong energy. So it means in meetings, sometimes it can come across a little bit overwhelming. If you think of it like being in a meeting with an intense person who's really driven on their purpose and on their mission, if they get lost in a tunnel vision, it can even be like, oh my gosh, I'm just being driven over by bulldozer or the cannon, right? So taking responsibility for that, saying, yes, actually, I do carry the strong energy. And sometimes if I consciously and intentionally create space to figure out what is the framework of the other person, what is the success for them, and what they already thinking and feeling and observing about our mutual objective, for example, profit together with the impact.
Definitely. And I think the early stage of an engagement is very different from the later stage. So that's why it's so important to focus on discovery and come at it from a place of curiosity and talking about the data important to them rather than pushing the evidence that, they ought to be thinking about from an ought perspective, that's getting a bit philosophical. But by the end of the conversation, you need to be succinct. And that's something that people who are intense sometimes struggle with, this ability to be succinct, to actually understand and analyze and process everything that you've learned over this time. And again, keep their perspective in mind. And to me, it's different from kind of an emotional intelligence. We all hear a lot about that. It's a relational intelligence. And I think relational intelligence, it relies on this combination of emotional, physical, mental, and even dare say spiritual, dimensions of intensity, as I understand them from you and in your work.
Yes, thank you, Courtney, for mentioning it. Yes, because intensity indeed can exist in one of the four of our worlds of existence, right? And it's important to be aware of how does it show up for each of us individually, and also because intensity is a life force. If we want to tune it up, in what area of your existence would you like to tune it up? Would you like to tune it up in mental world and emotional, in kind of even physical or spiritual, and to be in service of being succinct? And I really like it that, Courtney, you said that. It's so important to summarize what are takeaways. And what I'm hearing as a takeaways is in order to stay in this energy of nothing to prove, we have to remind ourselves to take a bigger perspective and to invite curiosity to define the framework of the other. And also, you said a very important moment that those dimensions evolve as our relationships evolves. So what are you taking away, Courtney, in spirit of summarizing?
But that's, well, one thing I do want to mention, it's a bit self-serving, but I think helpful for the audience. This physical dimension, it's such an important thing. And I've learned that this year. And it actually helps me be more focused in my professional life, to have like a physical awareness. And one of the things I did practically, I'm a lifelong swimmer. I was an age group competitor. And I decided to do my first open water competition swimming this very famous strait, Chinakale Strait to Gallipoli, from Europe to Asia. It's not very far. It's not probably anything more intense than a half marathon. So it wasn't that big of a deal for someone who was a lifelong swimmer. But it was a physical daily reality to prepare for this. And it actually helped me show up in a way professionally and personally that I hadn't felt since I had been a competitor, which was, decades ago. And so that was a new idea there that I just shared, but it's part of the summary. And in the summary, that in addition to what you said, which I think was already very succinct, is that remember that intensity have lots of different aspects, and that it does evolve, and you're an agent in that evolution. But your relationship that you have professionally or personally is where your agency shows up. So you may be different in one meeting to the next. You can't be single-minded. You have to be open and know that this trust will help channel your power and help what you have to say resonate to people with nothing to prove.
Yeah, I love it, Courtney. And you brought a very important point, because actually connecting with our physicality, it opens perspectives everywhere. And for you, it's clearly came through this setting yourself this amazing challenge that is completely aligned to your history as well. So that's a wonderful reminder for everyone. So Courtney, where our listeners can find you?
Can find me?
Yes. Like where do you hang out? Might be on LinkedIn or
good question. I'm on LinkedIn. In fact, I'm really excited. We're just about to release our own 10 years of impact of Moonshot Global, the firm that I founded 10 years ago, where we talk about how our work has catalyzed change towards life on a livable planet. We have examples of some of the work that we have done, the clients, what they've done with the ideas that we've introduced on partnerships, shared value partnerships, on monetizing impact. We're getting set to start to release that in February. So it's Courtney S. Roberts, LinkedIn, and we found actually social media spaces to be quite toxic, so we stick to LinkedIn. We're setting up a blue sky presence, but we want to make sure we're starting in the positive spaces and contributing to dialogue that's filled with insight and energy, and so we're focused on those two areas. We often also go to some of the events in our space, so Global Impact Investing Network. We're not at World Economic Forum this year, but we often come to events at the World Bank Group during the spring meetings and annual meetings, and also to the climate-focused events in Europe and developing countries. So I'm also finding more spaces in Washington, D.C. There's where I live. There's a really wonderful series called Impact for Breakfast that Duke University is leading, and a former head of Global Innovation Fund in the UK, Alex Swanee, is one of the organizers of that, and often has very insightful guests. We hang out there. So hopefully that's enough, but definitely on LinkedIn, and it would be wonderful if people could look for the 10 years of impact work that we release in about 10 days time, and would love to hear feedback and anything that resonates with anyone.
Fabulous, Courtney. You're doing a very important work, and hopefully that being in that energy of nothing to prove will help to make our planet more livable. So thank you for being with me, and
Thank you
to
very
our
much.
listeners.
Thank you very much.